Second Fenway rundown of the week, pre-recorded a couple days in advance because if this list had changed in the last 48 hours, something would have gone catastrophically bizarre. This is the Red Sox Quarter-Century Team debate. I'm Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam here, and it is 2025, so we are a quarter of the way through this glorious century. Matt Votor, columnist for MassLive, asked us to do these teams. We have done them over the course of the last few weeks of who would start at each position for the Boston Red Sox if you compiled over the last 25 years. Honestly, as I sat down to do this, I thought it's going to be kind of hard. And then once you start kind of going through each position, there's really only a couple of debates. And so we are going to kind of name who we have, and then we're going to uh, kind of freely talk about, maybe some other options and bench options and stuff. Sean and I haven't really gone over each other's lists, so we're gonna try to have fun with it. Pretty informal. I know Matt Votor is compiling these in a larger project down the road, and you'll see the written versions of them. But just something that we are going to change up the pod with this week a little bit. So, any thoughts? You've obviously covered all
Yeah,
these
no, it's
teams.
fun. I mean, I kind of did this in an MLB notebook a couple of months ago, and you're right. Other than a couple of positions, and we'll get to those in a minute, they're fairly obvious answers here. But it is interesting to think about the demarcation of starting with 2000 and up through 25. It changes your view on a few things. There's one notable player who unquestionably would have been part of this team if you started 5 years earlier, if you went from 95 or 96 on.
The
But most of
Alcatillo
them,
lifetime team. We'll get to that too.
yeah, most of them are pretty clear cut in terms of the choices that you make, but fun to do.
Yep. And here we go. So we did the 1 through 9, then five starters, a setup man, a closer, the manager, and the GM, as per Matt Votor's rules. There is, if you were to do this a different way, you could come up with some four bench spots. We'll debate that. But we will go kind of position by position. And for some of the easiest ones, probably talk about, who else was in the running if you had to consider someone else. The first spot is catcher. I think it is that's as easy as it gets for
Yep.
the Red Sox and Jason Varitek. And obviously, you covered his entire career and now his entire coaching career. I've only seen the second half of that, but as a kid, obviously appreciated the contributions, the leadership, and I feel like it's him in the field there.
Yeah, this and second base were the easiest two choices to make.
We
Veritek,
call that a spoiler.
yes, Veritek, the captain, a solid defender, particularly in his prime in the early 2000s. His offensive contributions were significant. He'd give you 15 to 20 homers. He was incredibly durable. It wasn't unusual for him to play 130 or so games. His leadership, his handling of the pitching staff, really, there could be nobody else behind the plate but Jason Veritek.
So, what if there was? I mean, for so many years, obviously, he had that position, and then the Red Sox kind of changed it around and did not have their established guy. I mean, here's
Almost have to go with Christian
that's what I
Vasquez
was gonna say.
by
Yeah.
by default. A couple of decent years offensively. And then you think back to 2018, they're using Sandy Leone as much as Christian Vasquez in the postseason, so that works against him a little bit. Vasquez had a decent career here, not a great one, but almost again by default, he's the number two choice.
Yeah, and if you're really talking about who the number three choice is in that group, and we don't have to do this for every position because it's obviously Veritek in the field. Jared Saltalamacchia comes into that mix as a guy
Yeah.
who was, I mean, that's how big I think the gap was between,
Yep.
if you look at who was the main starter in most years from, Sandy Leone and Blake Swihart and Perzinski and Victor Martin. Like there's been some kind of 1 year guys, obviously some backups, Mirabelli and Hatterberg, but Vasquez and I think Saltalamacchia probably round out the top three if you had to do it. But we don't. Moving on to first base. Um, this one I think is a little bit more complicated.
Yep.
Abraham Toro did not make the cut, but we, I think, both settled on the same player here. I went with Kevin Youkilis. just as somebody who obviously had some incredible years there during the run in the mid 2000s. This is kind of one of those that there's no clear-cut option because the options are rather uninspiring. There are some good players in this mix. There are some horrible players in this mix. And since 2000, there's been a lot of guys demand the position. We'll get to them. This isn't, and this is probably one where you talk in your 5, 6, 7 years earlier. Mo Vaughn comes into the equation. He does not.
Yeah, I went with Euclid as well. Again, not a great field, and it's kind of funny. You would expect that throughout their history, they've had some terrific first basemen, Mo Vaughn, George Scott, Yaz played there for a while. There have been some really good players play first base there. Nick Osaski for one season with 30 homers and 100 runs knocked in. But during this 25-year stretch, there hasn't been that dominant first baseman. And Euclid split time between third and first. I was a little surprised. In my mind, I would have said he played more games at third than first. That was not the case. He played more games at first than third. It was, 500 to 300 something, something like that. But some of his best seasons happened at first, and he's the choice here. I would say maybe number two could be Mitch Moreland. Does that sound right? As a guy that contributed in the mid-teens into the 2018 championship team, had a big home run in the World Series, a nice contributor, but not an all-star, and yet he might be number two.
Yeah, I mean, Mitch Moreland is in the mix of, I think, four guys who could have a case to be made here, and you'd be the expert on a lot of these. Some guys I know you think are either overrated for their contributions or just longevity wasn't there. The four that I would put in that second tier behind Euclid would be Mitch Moreland, who I covered, and then three guys I did not: Mike Napoli, Adrian Gonzalez, and Kevin Millar.
Yeah. Um,
I
I
mean, the
mean,
peak, right? Gonzalez had, I think, the best year of all these guys looking at,
yeah,
and
he had
his,
a nine something OPS,
yeah,
but was really only there a year and a half.
right.
It did not work out for him. This was not a good market or franchise for him. He seemed to always be overwhelmed by the attention. But the one full year he played was a good one. It just maybe didn't result in the kind of numbers people anticipated. Everyone thought, oh, this is a guy who's going to wear out the wall and he's going to hit 35 to 40 and he's going to have 40 something doubles. And he never really became that kind of force, but he did have a good year. Did get on base a lot. And as I said, I think his one year here, he had an OPS
Yeah, it's 7 war
140.
year. I mean, looking at this, I mean, I might go Napoli over Moreland, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, well, we're talking about kind of veteran guys who are the same type of player, really. Uh, some production, some decent defense at first base, and some contributions to winning teams. Moreland in 18 and Napoli in 2013.
Yeah, and the games played leaders at that position in the four championship years change. Obviously, that's what we're talking about. Millar in '07, in '04, Euclid in '07, Napoli in '13, and Moreland in '18. And since then, the games played leaders at first base for the Red Sox since Mitch Moreland left: Michael Chavis, Dahlbeck, Casas in his one good year, Dom Smith, and Abe Toro. So those guys are not in the mix. One of those years for Dahlbeck that he was the leading starter, negative zero point 0.7 WAR. And we vowed to never mention that name on the pod anymore. No disrespect to him, but breaking our rules. Second base, Sean, as obvious as it gets with Dustin Pedroia. You kind of touched on it a little bit. That's even funnier to go back to the games played or maybe this is opening day starters that I'm looking at, or most common players. I guess. So here we have since 2000. Um, I don't even know who this is. Manny Alexander. That was he. Shea Hillenbrand, who actually had a good year. Uh, oh no, that's third. Sorry, my bad. Jose Offerman, I do remember him.
Hmm.
Ray Sanchez, who I really don't. Todd Walker, Mark Bellhorn, Mark Loretta. 10 years of Pedroia, Eduardo Nunez, Brock Holt, Jose Peraza, Christian Arroyo, Trevor Story, Christian Arroyo, Emmanuel Valdez, Christian Campbell. As we sit here today, David Hamilton, Cedar Rafaela. There's really not even a good second option there.
No, there really is not. It is all about Dustin Pedroia, who, for the majority of those years, from his rookie year of '07 through, let's say, up to about 2015 was a Hall of Fame caliber player. That's not to suggest that he's going to get into the Hall of Fame, as I think most people now realize the career wasn't quite long enough. He was robbed by injuries late in his career that compromised his last 4 or 5 years in Boston. But for that 8 year period or so from 2007 to 2015, he was as good a player as any second baseman in the game and on track to become a Hall of Fame player before injuries cut him short.
Yep. And so that's just as obvious as it gets. Dustin Pedroia in that spot. Shortstop, another one, very obvious, but this is where, you talk about the turn of the century being an important demarcation line, Sean.
Yeah, if you rewind the clock and start this 5 years earlier or 4 years earlier in 1997, then a very good case could be made for Nomar Garcia-Parra, who won two batting titles, who hit 372 one year, who was just a great player. We can lament how things ended here and the fact that he was unavailable for large chunks of 2004 and he ended up being traded not only to improve defense and reliability, but also change the clubhouse culture and vibe. It did not end well here. That's putting it mildly. But from 97 through 2003, he was a great player, but you can't credit him with those 97, 98, 99 seasons toward this. So the next logical choice here is Xander Bogaerts.
Yep, and Xander Bogaerts with that, pretty good peak if you really look at, like 15 through 22 when he left. Some really productive seasons, a staple. You covered all of it. I covered most of it. A guy that was a sure thing to be in there every day. At shortstop, I think he leads the franchise in games played at shortstop. Right, he had that by the end, and so he is the clear-cut choice. Nomar is my favorite player growing up. I'm sure we had very different experiences on July 31st, 2004. You probably cried a lot less than I did that day. I was 8, so or 7, so it's okay. No, 8. Um, this is another one where obviously he, even though, we started in 2000, and Nomar had great years in 2000, '02, and '03 before being traded in '04, he probably is second on the list. And if you look at, some of the stop gaps in between and since, there's a Lansing year in '04. It says the games leader or the war leader at
Another
shortstop.
jolly teammate that we had that you missed out on, Mike Lansing. What a joy he was to deal with.
Was he nice? Was he nice?
Was not.
Okay. Pokey Reese played more shortstop than I would have guessed in '04. We had Alex Gonzalez, who wasn't he like the greatest defender of all time when he came?
He was a very good glove guy, yes, but didn't give them much offensively.
And then this is a special group here. The late Julio Lugo, Nick Green, Marco Scudero, Mike Aviles, and Stephen Drew bridging the gap to Xander
Stephen Drew was
Bogaerts.
okay. He gave them a little pop and was reliable defensively, but not anything to write home about. He
And
was a
then
league average player about.
in the Kike shortstop season, which was an abomination, followed by Rafaela leading the team in games there last year, and obviously, Story. Story was looked at as the heir apparent to Bogarts, even though like they're the same age, and who knows? Maybe he will turn into that. Obviously, that's for the regular versions of this podcast more than anything. We go to third base now, and this one is, I think, super, super obvious. Though there's one okay candidate. Rafael Devers was a somewhat limited player and a controversial one by the end here, but in his peak was great. And it's still young and still probably will be in San Francisco. I think he is the choice at third base for the quarter-century Red Sox team.
Yeah, not much debate there. As a guy who regularly hit 30 home runs and knocked in 90 or more runs, defense was always an issue. He led the league at his position in errors, and every year he was here. Some years were better than others with the glove, but from a production standpoint, hard to argue with Rafael Devers. The only other name that I think we're on the same page here, the only other name to throw into the hat, it would be Mike Lowell, who was the World Series MVP in 2007 and had a pretty good run for 4, maybe 5 years, but was in his 30s after arriving. He was a throw-in to the deal that landed them Josh Beckett. They had to take Mike Lowell's contract off the Marlins' hands to make it work. Not much was expected, and he turned out to have a few very good seasons in Boston, but not to the level production-wise that Rafael Devers contributed.
Rafi said he played third. He did, and he will play third on this quarter century Red Sox All-Star team or quarter century team. The other, looking at this list, Sean, and this will, probably jog some different coverage memories, but they got some really good years at third base out of some really, kind of random guys. Shea Hillenbrand had a much better year than I would have guessed he would have had in 2002. He was an all-star, apparently. It seems like he might have.
He was the Scott Cooper of the early 2000s, where they needed a all-star rep, and Shea Hillenbrand was it.
It's still a 4-3 WAR season, not horrible. Bill Miller then had, a couple of good years, obviously, in '04. Then it was Lowell. Then Beltre had the incredible year he had. You can throw Euclid into the mix there. Friend of the program, Will Middlebrooks. There's a year of Pablo Sandoval, a bad one. Then Travis Shaw, and then Devers and Bregman on this list. So I'd say Lowell is second. But, a couple of, not bad players there. Obviously, Beltre's a Hall of Famer. That one year in 2010 doesn't get him on the list. It gets him mentioned on the pod. Bill Miller also, I think, maybe an honorable mention behind Lowell.
Yeah, won a batting title while he was here. The kind of guy that would hit
Did you know
eight.
he hit two grand slams from different sides of the plate in the same game?
Yes, he did, and I was there for that night in Arlington. That was a fun night.
And
Um,
Danny Jansen played for two teams in a game, by the way.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yep.
Um, Bill Miller hitting at the bottom of the order, eighth or ninth often, but a good offensive player. Not the kind of run production or slug maybe that you necessarily expect out of a third baseman. He was more of a bat to ball guy, high batting average. As I said, won a batting title. Good guy in the clutch. And a good teammate here, but not a long run and not anything to dislodge Rafael Devers from the top rung.
Yep. And so that's the infield. Veritek, Euclid, Pedroia, Bogarts, and Devers make up that list. We now move to the outfield, where I think this was a little bit harder in a couple of spots. Maybe not, depending on how you look at it. This is not always based on longevity. It is based on production. In left field, Sean, there are some candidates no better in my mind than Manny Ramirez.
Yeah, that's pretty much a slam dunk. Never a great defender in the outfield, quite an adventure, often with the glove. He was kind of indifferent to his play in the outfield often, but you could make the case that Manny, along with Albert Pujols and Miguel Cabrera, and Aaron Judge are the four best right-handed hitters of the last 30 or so years. Manny was a hitting savant for all the drama he created off the field and in the clubhouse and the nightmares he brought his manager. There's no denying his offensive brilliance.
Yep, and he is the guy in that spot for me. I think very clearly. You look at the other options before and after. Troy O'Leary was in 2000. Then Manny took over in '01. Jason Bay had a great year in 2009. Um, Sean, I'm going to ask you, the 2010 Red Sox, they were not a bad team. Who led the team in appearances in left field?
I'm afraid I'm drawing a blank.
It was Bill Hall.
Well, that sort of speaks volumes.
2010, they had, this is wild here. Bill Hall, Daniel Nava, Jeremy Hermita, Darnell McDonald, Corey Patterson, Ryan Kalish, Ellsbury, Josh Reddick, and Jonathan Van Avery split left field, and they still won 89 games. That's one of the great miracles in the history of baseball. They filled
True.
that with Carl Crawford, who was horrific, and then mix
Cody
and match
Ross.
here, huh?
Cody Ross.
Then it was like Daniel Nava and Cody Ross, and then Johnny Gomes. We get to a Hanley year, and then Brock Holt, and then you get into, I think, probably the two, the second place candidate, if you want to give him this, would probably be Benintendi.
Yeah, I mean, and that again was a guy that had a couple of good years at the start of his career, had difficulty staying healthy, and ended up being traded. He has not had a great career after that in Kansas City or New York or Chicago. Signed the biggest deal at the time in White Sox history, may still be for all that, for all we know, and has not really made good on that promise that we saw the first few years.
Yep, definitely. Obviously still struggling in Chicago and fits the bill for that team. Also, since then, Verdugo, Yoshida, the highest WAR season of any Red Sox left fielder in the span was Duran last year. I'm sure his defensive capabilities and contributions were greater than what Manny ever gave them, so that's why. But Manny Ramirez is the clear-cut guy here. In right field, this is an interesting one because this is definitely not longevity. This is not, it might be actually accumulated WAR over that time. But this is, I think, based on peak, superstar level, all that type of stuff. To me, it's Mookie Betts, who was
Mhm.
obviously not here super, super long, but I think is the guy you have to pick.
Yeah. What was the WAR in 18? Double
10-7.
figure. Yeah. That was the highest WAR for a Red Sox position player since Carl Yastrzemski and his Triple Crown season of 67. So that kind of puts it in perspective how great that year was, in which he contributed in every way imaginable at the plate, on base, power, slug, stolen bases, base running, defending. He was a complete player, kind of at coming into the prime of his career. It was his
Hmm.
breakout year. He had another year where his WAR was in the sevens or eights, I think. Um,
No, there's another 2016, 9.8.
okay, close. So 2 years there, if for no other reason than those two seasons, he's the guy, and Red Sox fans continue to lament his departure here.
The other two in the mix here, Trot Nixon had a good run,
Yep.
followed by JD Drew.
Yes, people tend to beat up on JD Drew a little bit for his well chronicled injury history and not being able to stay on the field. Um, but Drew is actually a pretty good player with a OPS, I think, in the 800s for his time in Boston. A pretty good defender. Not any,
824.
pardon me?
824.
Yeah.
I would have taken the under on that.
That suggests a pretty good player.
Yep.
And I remember when Drew was having those kind of years, late in the 2000s, that was the first time I really became aware of the reliance on of the front office on rate stats over counting stats, because Theo Epstein was constantly pointing out the rate stats and his OPS over the more traditional measurements at the time of batting average, home runs, and RBI. Those were never off the charts, but his rate stats were good. He played a pretty good right field when he was out there. I would still have Trot Nixon ahead of him for his durability and his contributions to two world championships in '04 and '07. But yeah, clearly Mookie Betts as the leader.
Yep. And so, the cavalcade of stars, since we can go and talk about some of these guys that man the position. In 2004, the game's leader was Kapler. Because I guess, Nixon hurt for most of '04. Is that right? Yes.
He did have an injury, yes.
Yeah. So he played 48 games in '04. Didn't know that. I'm sure the Providence Journal coverage of those days and trials and tribulations were absolutely phenomenal. So, Drew, and then we get into Cody Ross, Victorino, Nava, 2015. Rusney Castillo is even on this list. And then Pilar, Renfro, Jackie Bradley, Verdugo, Tyler O'Neill, and Willie Abreu sent some good seasons in there, but I agree very clearly on Mookie Betts. This one we get to next is, I think, the probably the most difficult that we are going to have, center field. And I know this was one that, we talked about this a little bit. I told you this was the most difficult on my list. I think there were three pretty good candidates. You could go with any of them. I went with Johnny Damon, not here very long, but some very, very good seasons. And I think just a memorable nostalgia star factor that he gave you in '04. He's the guy that gets my vote here.
Yeah, I agree. That was the one I debated because Jacoby Ellsbury is kind of in the mix as well. He had a incredible year in 11, I think it was. Was that
Hmm.
the the 30-30 year where he exploded and had a ton of stolen bases plus a 30 home run season. Again, availability was often an issue with Ellsbury, and Damon, I think, was more impactful, even though he never had one single season that was as good as Ellsbury's best.
Yeah. When I would say, if you're talking about defense also and longevity, Jackie Bradley too, I think deserves a mention to be considered in this. He's a guy that, I think is not someone you can discount from this race. I'm going Damon. I'd probably have Ellsbury second. Uh, a couple of great years for Ellsbury, but bounced around a little bit. I might think about putting Jackie Bradley second. That might be recency bias, might be whatever it is, but I think he's in the mix too.
Yeah, he's in the mix. I would give a slight edge to Ellsbury. I think he was the
The
superior
ceiling's
offense.
higher.
Yeah, right. Greater heights. Bradley was probably the better defender. Both of them were pretty good. Certainly, Bradley threw better. I threw better than Jacoby Ellsbury, and I was also more available than Jacoby Ellsbury.
That's true.
But Bradley is in the mix as the third guy, I would say.
When this century started, the starting center fielder for the Red Sox was Carl Everett. I know he hated Shaughnessy. Did he hate you too?
We had a couple of confrontations. Yes, we were not the best of buds.
Was it because of your insistence on dinosaurs being a thing?
That wasn't even part of the equation.
Oh.
It was just my general presence that seemed to bother him.
Well, Carl Everett and I have that in common, and I will be sure to tell him if I ever meet him. So that's center. Carl Everett, Johnny Damon, Coco Crisp had a couple of years there. Obviously, in 2007, Crisp and Ellsbury. In 2010, this team's unbelievable here. This team won 89 games. The leader in left field we just talked about was Bill Hall. The leader in center field in games played was Darnell McDonald. At shortstop, Marco Scutero. I don't really know how they put together the performance they did there, but
Might have been
masterclass by Tito, right?
Might have been Tito's best managerial job.
It might have been the best managerial job in the history of baseball. And then you get into, the Jackie Bradley years, a pretty good give the devil his due. Kike Hernandez year in center field. And then that's after talking about that horrendous year in 2023 at shortstop. And then Duran played there the most in 23. Rafaela, and some of these guys that we've seen obviously mixing and matching in the last couple of years. That one to me is the toughest call. I think you could go. I still think you could go Damon, Ellsbury, or Bradley. I think we both kind of agreed that it was Damon. So I think we have the same starting nine here, which does not make for the best podcast, but it is what it is. There's some clear-cut choices. We did not do this again for the actual rankings and teams that we did. If you had to pick four bench players on this list, who would you go with? I'm going to just give
Well,
you.
I mean, can we go with backups at some of the, can we do, for
No, you're
instance,
going. It's not bench players. It's the four. It's the four best of the honorable mentions that didn't make the cut.
yeah. Well, then I would say probably Ellsbury,
Yeah.
Nixon. The problem is you need a catcher, kind of,
No, you
right?
don't. That's not. We're not playing.
All right.
This team's not going
Uh,
out there.
then I would say Nomar, and maybe Bill Miller.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, Ellsbury because it was the toughest call there. Nixon or Drew probably in one of those spots. Maybe one of the first basemen we talked about, Napoli or Moreland. So I don't know. That's tough. If I had it written down, it'd be a little cleaner.
Here's a
DH,
hard one. Here's
yeah,
a hard one. DH.
yeah. Hanley,
Not
Justin
quite.
Turner,
No,
Carlos Baerga in 2002.
that would be David Ortiz, number 34.
Okay, well, that's that one. Does that require much debate?
No.
He's the best player on this list, right?
Uh, I guess you could make the case for Manny,
Or
but yeah,
Mookie?
I mean, in terms of offensive production, no question it was David.
Yeah. All right, we will move on now to the starting rotation. This is one that we definitely have some differing opinions on. Just because I think you know the there's debate on longevity versus peak, all that type of stuff. And so I will give you my starting five right now. I know that might be a little bit different than the ones you have. I'll give them one by one, and you can agree or disagree. I think number one, Pedro Martinez is pretty clearly on your list.
He certainly is. He's number one.
Number two, and I don't really have these last four in any order.
Yeah.
I just kind of how what came to me. Kurt Schilling, I have
Yes.
on this list.
Yep.
Josh Beckett for his peak.
I do not have Josh Beckett on here.
Chris Sale
Yes.
and John Lester.
And John Lester. Yeah.
So,
In case of Josh Beckett, I have Tim Wakefield.
mhm.
Somewhat of a perhaps sentimental choice, but I'm looking at a guy who, while he did not debut after 2000, many of his peak years came from 2000 on. And I think some recognition has to be made for the yearly contributions he made and the fact that he is tied for the most number of wins in franchise history here with 192. To me, that's got to be honored. And though Josh Beckett's 2007 season was better than any one season Tim Wakefield had, Beckett's contributions were only for 4 or 5 years. A couple of them were not very good. He was a terrific pitcher in '07 and a great October pitcher. People forget how dominant he was that postseason.
Yep.
That was as good as any run that we've seen in the 21st century, but it was 1 year, and I'm giving the edge to Tim Wakefield for that other spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that's a totally reasonable case. He obviously pitched for that entire decade and was a staple and racked up and compiled all those stats and meant so much to everything and everything the Red Sox did. So, cannot, doubt you there. I was looking for ceiling. I wanted to kind of establish five guys who could be a number one on any given day, and I think you get that with the obvious in Pedro, even though he, only had the 5 years at the beginning of the decade. Schilling was not here long, but it's I think you think sentimental value, what he meant. When you think of the Red Sox since 2000, those 2004 guys get more weight, and I know that he's um, was not there long and he was at the end, but what he did in those first couple seasons, was extraordinary. Lester, I think, is an absolute shoe-in, no question for this list with the number of seasons, big performances, couple of rings. Any guys that overlapped on more than one World Series
Postseason,
team. What? Postseason?
13 postseason.
Yep. And '07 winning that last game, all that type of stuff. And then Sale, people look at Sale's Red Sox tenure and they talk about it from a kind of a disappointed in for some reason way, and it's not. Got the last out in the World Series, was dominant in the Cy Young voting year after year after year. When he came over in 2017, he finished second. In 2018, he finished fourth. Before then, he had all those Cy Young uh, finishes. Just to me, it's an ace. I know the playoff performance wasn't unbelievable, so he gets in there. The interesting, kind of down ballot guys. I wonder if you'd want to even discuss. To me, Clay Buchholz was here for a very, very long time. He had
Mhm.
some really good years. There's also, guys like Rick Porcello who won a Cy Young here. Guy like Nate Eovaldi, who was the number one here, kind of pretty clearly for a while. Derek
Eric
Lowe.
Lowe.
Anybody in that mix really stand out?
I mean, all very good and all worthy of discussion, but not quite good enough to crack the top five for me. You probably, if you had to take Beckett out, you'd probably replace him with Wakefield, and I
Hmm.
would do the opposite. If I couldn't pick Wakefield, I would probably go with Beckett. But those guys you just mentioned, Porcello, Buchholz, um, Evaldi, and Derek Lowe all had big contributions to the Red Sox at some point.
Yeah. And, like you look at guys who were rotation staples for 5 or 6 years. Eduardo Rodriguez, like never hit a ceiling, but was. Pavetta, same type of thing in terms of, leading him in innings. There's also like Daisuke was in this mix at a certain point. And so there's some interesting names on the list. I think, David Price, like there's some guys that had some, big, big moments, some big names in there that didn't crack that. And look, I'll give you this now. And I hope for your sake that you're retired if we do the 30 years of this in 2030, and I bet you can guarantee
Well,
that. You want to make a MassLive Fenway rundown guarantee?
Uh, yes, but maybe I'll be talked out of retirement to do that with you.
If when we do that, Garrett Crochet has a pretty good chance of being on that list.
He does. Um, he certainly is lined up to have a terrific career here, locked down for at least 6 years, options beyond that. And he clearly has established himself this year as one of the handful of best starters in the game. And the Red Sox have a legitimate ace in their control for the next little while. I would imagine he is going to be good enough to dislodge somebody on that list if we remake it in 2030.
Yep. And so that will be a conversation for a much, much later day uh, than we have. Closer is where we'll go next as we get toward the end here. They've had some real big time names, Sean, in this list, dating back to the very early days of my childhood. You know, Derek Lowe is obviously the closer at for years. Keith Folk,
Gordon.
yep. No, that was before. That
So
was
was that I
98,
think, yeah, I think those were right before the turn of the century now that I
96 through 99. So,
yeah.
so he just misses. But I mean, going back, they're low. Keith Folk obviously was one of the great moments in the history of baseball, Red Sox history, a big name. Koji with, I think, probably the best, though. We could talk about Chapman's year.
Best 5 months anybody had.
Yeah, wow.
For someone who didn't take the job until almost June,
hmm
and then the run he had in the 2013 postseason was unmatched.
And I mean, Chapman's in that range right now. Obviously, Kimbrel in 2018. Kenley Jansen was here for 2 years and is probably a future Hall of Famer. But I think based on longevity, dominance, all that type of stuff, my vote went to Jonathan Papelbon, and I'm guessing yours did too.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look back, I think, because it didn't end well here, and he's kind of been around and went to Washington and Philly after this. We forget at his height how good Jonathan Papelbon was. But for a period of about 5 years, you could make the case that he was the best closer in the game. He didn't have quite a long enough run to merit strong Hall of Fame consideration, but he was elite with a capital E in his time with the Red Sox, just unhittable and part of that 2007 championship team. Just the one, not around for '04 and gone by the time of 13, but he was automatic in 2007, and he had a number of years where his numbers were just ridiculous.
Yeah, and his, he came up and had the cameo in 2005, 3 starts, 17 overall appearances, and 06 through 11, the 6 full seasons with the Red Sox, an ERA of 2.30. He had 475 strikeouts and 395 in the third innings. You look at ERA under 1 in 2006, 0.92, ERAs under 2 in '07 and '09. 2010, he struggled a little bit, had a 390, was back under 3. I mean, but you look at that, let's say 4 year peak, 2006 to 2009. 151 saves in 264 innings, a 174. I mean, that's as good as it gets. I think, he's obviously the guy there. Who would you go with second? I mean, Koji for the, Koji and Folk to me and Kimbrel are kind of in that same range of,
Yeah, I would go with Folk because of what he meant in the postseason, and that takes nothing away from Koji in 2013, but Folk was immense in that postseason. The number of innings he threw without any rest at all. He kind of sacrificed his career for the team that October. Never again reached those heights, but let's be clear, they don't win in October of '04 without Keith Folk.
yeah, and he pitched in that playoff run 11 times, 14 innings, 19 strikeouts, 1 earned run. I didn't really realize that looking back, but that is a lot. Pitching on in October of that month, the 68th, the 12th, 13th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 23rd, 24th, 26th, and 27th. So yeah, I could say, and obviously he was not the same when he came back in 2005 and had a 5.91 ERA. The two we did setup men. Um, as the other guy, the
Yeah, and
other
these are
guys in
not,
this.
well, let's just make it Koji because we didn't pick him for closer. These are guys who pitch primarily in the eighth inning.
Yeah, or and other times, I think there's really two. We had this conversation in the press box a little bit. Mike Timlin and Okajima, maybe. But I think Mike Timlin probably gets the
Yeah,
nod.
or Junichi Tozawa might be in that mix. But I'd go with Okajima for a guy that came over, made the transition from NPB and was outstanding here, and gave them a lot. So I'd go with him.
Mike Timlin, a ton of appearances in here for 6 years, also in the mix.
Yeah, yep. You could go either way there.
Yeah. So that is the Red Sox quarter century team. Matt Votor had us do um, manager and GM. So I don't know if we want to get into that.
Well, pretty easy.
Bobby
Simple.
Valentine. There it is. That's the Fenway rundown for today. No, Theo and Tito.
Yeah.
Pretty obviously.
Yep. I don't see how you could go otherwise. Two World Series under them. Uh, John Farrell also won a World Series. Ben Cherington won a World Series. Um, Dave Dombrowski won a World Series, and Alex Cora won a World Series. But Theo and Tito were the tandem that put that championship. Well, Theo with some help from Dan Duquette, who had some contributions, significant ones, including both Pedro and Manny and Veritek and Derek Lowe with some great trades. But I think Theo is clearly the GM and Tito the manager.
Do you think one more World Series in the next 2 or 3 years from Cora threatens that mark for Tito?
The problem is that for deciding that is that Francona never had the lows that Cora had. He never had anything close to a last place finish. He never had a losing record with the Red Sox. He missed the postseason a few times, most famously in 2011, leading to his leaving the organization. Had kind of a tough time in '06, missed out on the playoffs in 2010, but almost always had them in the mix. He did not have the number of last place finishes that have happened under Alex Cora. So even winning a second one, I think the edge still goes to Tito.
That is finally our quarter century team. As you listen on this Thursday, Red Sox playing today in the series finale in Baltimore. We recorded this 2 days ago, so we don't know how the previous two games have gone. I can't tell you if they're going to finish off a sweep, work a split. Doesn't matter to me. I'm on the beach somewhere in North Carolina as you listen to this. And Sean and Chris will have you for the homestand. But a fun exercise. Thanks to Matt Votor for sending out the list. Sorry if we completely cut off the surprise of you running the column by doing this now, but felt like something to do. So there you go.